trusted to do Zoom very well. So getting better, we're all getting lots of practice. So just working at it. So are most of us gathered already, or? All right, I'm getting the thumbs up. So what I'd like to do, if for my own sake, and maybe not yours, but I think we could all use a moment of silence. And as we sit together, see if you can feel into the fact that the illusion of separate space, which even the physicists, the quantum physicists, are saying is an illusion. More and more they're saying the universe is more of a holographic structure. So let's see if we can feel into how we really are together. And it just helps to have this Zoom input. So welcome once again to our get-together. Even though I may have been the last one on, I'm welcoming everybody. And I've been thinking, I just want to start by saying, we hear all this about social distancing, and I'd really like us to consider calling it physical distancing, social connection. And that's what we're doing right now. And I wanted to connect with you guys around some of the challenges as we go through this coronavirus passage together. And so I'm going to start by talking some about just, simple down-to-earth ways to look at it, which might be helpful. And, then the natural question might be, well, that sounds very good and well, but how do I really do that in everyday life? And that's where a more classic Buddhist practice, that's a very simple one, will come in handy to help you build capacity to be able to respond and live in ways that are how we want to live, with more open hearts and more compassion, and hopefully not getting too down into our little lives that have gotten much smaller. And so in between the just sort of non-Buddhist-y, sort of common sensey stuff and the practice that will help us to be able to do those things, I'm hoping we can somehow figure out how to field some questions, because I would really like to hear from everybody what you're chewing on these days, what's going on for you. And even though we won't be able to answer everybody's questions, we might save some for next time. I invite you to write to us in between now and next week, so that then really I can incorporate some of what you guys are chewing on into what I talk about next week and the practice that I teach. So not having already gotten your questions, I'm going to guess that many of us are feeling like we're in this sort of pressure cooker situation where in some cases, many of us are sort of cooped up at home with family. And that can feel like a pressure cooker, especially with all the worries that we have, worries for loved ones, worries about our own work, just worries about the future of our society and our democracy. There are a lot of things that are contributing to our pressure cooker in the form of anxiety. And then on the other side of things, it may not be that we're stuck with, in this small space, everybody trying to work and parent and maybe be school teachers at the same time. Maybe on the other side of things, many of us are alone with our thoughts and the things that usually in everyday life when we're so busy and so on, they can stay in the background. But now, boom, they're right in front of us. They're right in our faces. And I think there's a way that that's true whether you're at home with a few other people or you're at home all alone, that really it's our own stuff that gets kind of up in our faces. I know when I was living in the country with my 3 little kids and my then husband, we were living a very isolated life. And so a lot of stuff came up in my face, in the face of the others I was living with. And, it seemed as though so-and-so was driving me crazy, but really, in a sense, it was my own intolerance with myself. I think that it was at the bottom of it. And then how was I going to be really okay with the foibles of somebody else? I wasn't okay with my own. So then I moved to Colorado, where I had neighbors, and it was 2 couples, and one of the couples had a toddler, and they were all sharing a house together, and they lived in amazing harmony. I was just astounded. I was like, how do you guys do that? And, I spent a lot of time with them. And so I knew they all had their foibles and they all knew each other's foibles. They also knew their own. And I was like, how are they doing this? And there were a couple of tricks that they talked about and that I observed were really true. One was just very simply, they practiced nonviolent communication, which was started by Marshall Rosenberg. And anybody can get those trainings on YouTube or buy his short, pithy book, which I believe is called Nonviolent Communication. It's the first book he wrote. And it's a great way to, when something comes up, just be able to talk about it, those difficult things, in a way that is less painful for the other person and more likely for success for you. So that's all good. So they did that, and they didn't wait. They, addressed it more in the moment, or if that wasn't handy, then within 24 hours. And they said that was really key, rather than saving it up for every Friday or something like that. They tried that. Very bad idea, because then they were saving it up. And by that time, they had been stewing on it and they were pretty far down the road and everything. So I thought, okay, well, that, duly noted. And then something that I observed that I thought was maybe the most important was this. So I'm going to use pretend names to protect the guilty. So Dave, we'll call him Dave, used to talk and talk in run-on sentences that would go on. I timed it one time, half an hour, not letting anybody else have a word in edgewise. And we were all sitting there, and we'd already finished dinner, and it was like we were a captive audience. We couldn't do anything. That was Dave. And, he was a sweetheart and everything, but he just, that was one thing that Dave did. Well, then there was Isabel, also pretend name, who just would go off on these dramas. And she knew she did it, just like Dave knew that he could go on about things. But what I noticed was, first of all, they knew it about themselves and they were willing to cop to it. And second of all, everybody else would just say, oh, that's Dave. That's just who Dave is. And they accepted Dave as he was. So there wasn't any passing judgment. It was just seeing it. Okay, well, that's Dave. And, oh, there goes Isabel again, and she would say, oh, yeah, I've just been on another drama, this kind of thing. So, but it was this acceptance while seeing everybody, just had their stuff, but that's not who they really were. Right. And you've heard me, I think most of you have heard me talk about um, this great ocean that makes all these waves, and each of us is a wave, but we're made of ocean. So that's who we really are. And the particular shape in a particular moment is not that important. And our particular neuroses, that's not the main point. So it's okay to acknowledge them. And it's okay that Dave has his tendency to go on at the mouth. And it's okay that Isabel has her thing. And, I have my thing, you have yours, and so on. When I was living in the country before that, in that more isolated setting, I noticed that it's really hard for us to cop to stuff. And I think that is key to simplifying working stuff out. So if I can just say, yeah, I made a mistake there. I could have said that a lot better. Sorry. I realized that could just cut through a whole lot of complexity and a whole lot of ill will and everything and just clear it all away. And yet, I was like, that seems so hard. And I realized it was because I was afraid I would look bad to the other person. I was embarrassed. But actually, when you think about somebody who's done something that you're uncomfortable about, when you say, ouch, you stepped on my toe or whatever, and they don't cop to it, I mean, you already know they did it. So if they cop to it, we're like, hey, that was courageous. And I feel so much better. Thank you. That's how we feel. So that's probably how other people feel when we cop. So imagine if everybody could do that. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to do an I'm sorry practice. That is now my new practice. And every day I'm going to say, I'm going to cop to something once a day. So I started with once a day. And, after a while, I could actually think of several things every day that I could cop to. And, it turned out as I thought it would, that, the other person didn't think the worst of me. They were relieved and they respected me for having the courage to say that. And it just cleared the air. So, again, these are all just really simple things I'm talking about. But simple isn't the same thing as easy. So sometimes, it's hard to do that. And I think one reason is judgmentalness. I think when we're cooped up with others, particularly, we can't afford to be judgmental toward ourselves or others. When we're cooped up with ourselves, of course, we can be judgmental about ourselves, especially since our not so beautiful parts can come up in our faces. And if we can just go ahead and accept, oh, this is Dave, oh, this is so and so, that's where they're at right now. That's not their essence. Their essence is pure, just like everything in the world and everyone in the world. And they're just doing their best, just like me. So there's also kind of a relief when we can say, it's okay that so and so, keeps using the dish towel as their personal napkin. It's okay that so and so is always leaving a mess. It's okay that so and so keeps saying the same thing to me that drives me crazy. It drives me a little less crazy when I feel like, yeah, but actually, it's okay in the grand scheme of things. And it's all the more okay if we cannot pass judgment about ourselves. I really believe that's where it starts. So this all brings me to a part of a poem that's one of my favorite poems of all time. It's called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. So I want to share it with you, just this one stanza. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. So, doesn't that sound lovely? And then how do we do this? So I think key is cultivating love and compassion for ourselves first. I've kind of been saying that. And yet we Westerners in particular are kind of crummy at that. Some of you may have heard me tell the story of Mingyur Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Lama who has taught for many years in this country. As he was starting to work with Westerners, he talked to a friend of mine who is a longtime student of his. And he said, I don't understand. You Westerners keep saying that you don't like yourselves and you can't feel compassion for yourselves. I don't understand this. And actually, a lot of Tibetan Lamas have said this. My Lama, Tuku Sangak Rinpoche, has also had trouble with this. And the Dalai Lama has mentioned really having trouble with this. And Mingyur Rinpoche had an interesting idea for the way to work with this. He decided to make it his personal practice every day. When he would sit on the cushion, he would formally do this. Tell himself that he's actually not worthy. He's not great. He's just got all these, he's short and, he doesn't understand this and he doesn't know that and he can't do this very well. And all these sort of surface things about his unworthiness. Of course, and not looking at all at his essential nature, which is the same as everybody else's. He's made of that ocean of awareness that's perfect, that we're all made of. So he was looking at it like that. And when he, had been doing this for a while, he was walking along one day and he was thinking, gosh, I'm terrible at such and such, and, this kind of thing. And he was really starting to feel kind of depressed and crummy. And he thought to himself, I really don't like myself very much. This is wonderful. Now I understand. He was so excited. So now he could help his Western students because he understood our mindset. Fortunately, there is a practice by which we can love and feel compassion for ourselves. And maybe that'll help us in our judgment department. This practice is called Donglen. And that's what I want to share with you today. Very simple practice using breath and sort of based on our natural tendency to have internal conversations with people where we sort of imagine them in our mind's eye and then have this interaction. So it's based on something we naturally do, but turning it towards this practice first of self-compassion and then stepping it out. So before we do that, I want to just see if anybody has asked any questions. I think, Jess, you were on duty in case you saw that somebody had asked a question. And I won't have much time because I want to be sure and give you enough time to learn this practice and do it. But while we're waiting for that, I want to say that during the week, if you want to do this practice again, however many times you want to do it, I will tirelessly lead you through it every time you click on the video of me doing it on the website. So let's see. Oh, yeah. So somebody asked what's the name of the practice, and it is Donglen, which means sending and receiving. So I'll just go ahead. That's part of my introduction, is telling you the name of the practice. And so we'll just go ahead, I think, with starting that because we don't have a lot of time together. It's amazing how quickly the time is going. But there will be more time for questions right after this. Hopefully I can answer one or two questions after this and before we close. So Donglin means sending and receiving. And that'll be clear as I explain how this practice works. So this is a compassion practice. And when we're feeling compassion for somebody, it means they're suffering and we don't want to see them suffer. First of all, we're suffering along with them, compassion, feeling along with. And also, we want to take away that suffering and replace it with happiness. That's just a natural human thing. Because our natural state is being joined at the root at this by this common source. It's actually natural for us when we see suffering to want to take that away and replace it with happiness. And now we're going to expand that natural capacity. Just as we have the capacity to lift small weights, if we keep lifting weights every day, we can lift heavier and heavier weights and more reps until we've built quite a strong capacity. This is also true with compassion. And that's been actually tested quite a bit in laboratories. And also I can speak from personal experience, as can many people. It really does expand our capacities for compassion. So that's kind of the goal of the practice and so on. And the way we do it is we imagine somebody who's suffering, and you don't have to have a clear image of their face down to their eyelashes and their pores. You can just kind of get a sense the way you would in an internal conversation, that you can kind of sense that that's so-and-so there. And you think of something that they're suffering from. And of course, immediately you want to take that away from them. So you use your breath, you breathe that in right into your heart, your compassionate heart. That's where you're feeling the compassion. And that's also where you feel your wanting to replace it with happiness. And so on the out breath, you breathe happiness for them. On the in breath, just to help with the visualization and the felt experience, you're going to imagine that that suffering is like heavy, dense clouds that you're breathing in. And then as you breathe out, it's these spacious, glowing clouds that you see soaking into them. And you begin to see their face change from this pained expression to a smile. So that's the basic practice, breathing in the dense clouds and then breathing out the bright clouds of happiness. And you may wonder, well, how many people can I do this for before I run out of happiness? Luckily, if we're through our compassionate heart, there's joy and happiness all around us. We're in a sea of it, and we're just so locked into our own little narrow world that we don't usually tune into that. But just know the compassion itself is a quality of the ground of being. And so our compassionate hearts can be like a doorway where the pain and suffering can go into that ground of being, no problem. And from the ground of being, which also has joy and happiness as a quality of it, that can come through and we can aim it towards that person. So we're like a lens or a doorway. That's what our compassionate heart can do. So that's quite a powerful thing, isn't it? And this is a practice that we can do practicing on the cushion. We can also do it if we're sitting with somebody who's suffering, who's sick, who's suffering from, the difficulties of their lives, whatever it is. As we're, in the store on our, grocery store run and we see suffering, we can breathe for that person through the mask. So we'll start with ourselves, because that has to be the basis of it. If we don't have compassion for ourselves, how are we going to step it out for others in a real, powerful, genuine way? So we'll start there. And if you practice this in the next week, I suggest you spend a lot of time focusing on that stage of it. But then we don't leave it there. We do step it out to those we already love and easily feel compassion for. And then we step it out further and further until it's quite large and it ends up being for all and everyone. So that is the practice, and I'll lead you through it. So it's good always to have a theme. And it's easier for me to lead this if we all kind of have the same theme. But of course, we've all got different things that are really up for us. And it's best to use something that's really up for you that then you can practice compassion for yourself around. And then you can think of other people who are suffering something similar and step it out to them and so on. So let me see if I can make this general enough and yet specific enough that hopefully you can relate. So I talked about the pressure cooker and where other people's imperfections might be driving us crazy, or our own might be driving us crazy. I'm gonna start with our own, but if you feel strongly you wanna pick how you've been driven crazy by somebody else's imperfections, or you just have something else that's really up for you, maybe you can just plop that theme in even as I'm talking us through it. I think you'll be able to see the parallels and continue on with your own theme as we're all continuing on together. So I like to close my eyes as I'm imagining one person or another and doing this practice. Please get comfortable, close your eyes, and we'll begin. So we'll begin with ourselves. And the theme I'm going to pick is overwhelm and worry. So I sort of see that as it can be one big thing, anxiety, that sort of thing. And when I'm feeling anxious and overwhelmed and worried, I can tend to hold myself together, go a little bit numb, which makes it harder for me to be present for others around me and to be present for the things that I'm overwhelmed about. Actually, it's not a great coping mechanism, but it's what I do. So, by the way, I think somebody has unmuted. But anyway, so imagining somehow how this works for you, how you might be feeling that right now in some way or another. And so we're all going to start by holding ourselves in that. The way I like to do that is to imagine my small suffering self inside my heart. That's how I'm going to do the breathing. So I see my small suffering self who's suffering from this overwhelm and anxiety and so on inside my heart, held in my heart. And I hold that small suffering self in my compassion. I want to take away that suffering. And so I breathe those heavy, dense clouds into my larger, greater heart. Where can easily pass through into that great ocean of being, the ground of being. And as I exhale and aim all my wishes for happiness And that joy that is a part of the ground of being, as I exhale, I aim that right into that suffering one. So those glowing clouds soak into that suffering one in my heart. Let's breathe a few breaths like that. Those dark, dense clouds passing through our compassionate hearts. And then the bright, sparkling clouds soaking into that suffering one from that great ocean of awareness that is ultimate compassion, ultimate joy. And breathing again, seeing the face of this small, suffering self shifting and changing. That face is now glowing and smiling. And one more breath. Now we imagine somebody who we naturally feel compassion for. We just love them, feel close to them. We know they too are suffering something similar. They're having their own version of overwhelm and anxiety. We don't want them to feel this. We want to take it away from them. So we breathe in into our hearts from them in front of us, right into our hearts, through our compassionate hearts. And then naturally, we want to replace that with joy. And so on the exhale, we breathe out the spacious, glowing clouds that soak into them. And we breathe again for them. And one more time. Seeing their faces completely change, and now they're glowing. Now we think of somebody else who we easily feel compassion for. And they're also feeling anxiety, overwhelm in their own particular way. We don't want them to feel it either. So this is kind of like a tide that's rolling out, starting from within us that we had for ourselves. And now we want to bring that to everybody else. We want to take that suffering away from everybody and replace it with ultimate, complete joy always. And so we breathe for now this next person. And we can be lavish with taking away every bit of the suffering and just surrendering it to the ground of being. And out of that beautiful ground of being, that vast ground of being, we can be lavish with the joy that we breathe out into that person. Seeing their face change. Feeling some satisfaction that finally there's something we can do in the face of their suffering. And now we think of whole groups of people who are suffering something similar to the suffering we started with. And we know that so many people in this world are suffering a similar form of anxiety and overwhelm. We don't want any of them to feel that. In many cases, their anxiety and overwhelm are even greater than ours. We want to take that away from them, every bit of it. And so we breathe. Now it's coming in really from all directions, because there are people in all directions feeling this. And so, like heroes, we're breathing in all of that suffering, where it can go right into the ground of being, through our hearts that are aiming it in this way. And from the ground of being, endless resources of joy, this endless fountain of joy can come forth in all directions and replace that suffering, soaking into every one of these people. Even if we don't know them, we're still aiming it for everyone who's feeling anxiety and overwhelm in the face of this. And we can feel the turning of their minds as this happens. And we breathe again. And the scientists tell us that not only is space an illusion as we conceive of it, but linear time is as well. And so we think that every being throughout all time has experienced terrible anxiety and overwhelm. Very similar, but maybe even stronger than we originally felt it when we began this. And we don't want any of them to suffer it. We know that suffering. We don't want that for anyone. And so we breathe for everyone. Breathing it in to take it away from everyone. And on the exhale, we aim that joy out to all and everyone, seeing it soak into them all. It's going out in all directions. No, we won't see everyone clearly, but feel and know that it's happening. Feeling gratitude that we can send this out into the shared mind at this time, especially. And so I'd like you all to take a moment and reflect on your experience. How do you feel right now? Just a few words that will bring it back to mind later. It's also partly just the process of reflecting and noticing in this moment. So now, I'd like you also to write, well, what happened for you? You've talked about how you feel. What happened? Again, just a few phrases, just really quickly. Mm. So I'm hoping everybody is seeing some of what's being shared. This is really beautiful. So many um, lovely experiences that people are having. And I believe this is closer to how reality really is. I think that if I could say what the bottom line of all the Buddhist practices is intended to be, it's to help us to bring our uh, experience of reality closer to actual reality. So um, it seems that people were touched by this practice in that way. So that's wonderful. Um, one person did mention that they remained feeling overwhelmed. Um, and that can be people's response to Donglin, in which case I would just suggest, if that's your experience, go slowly with yourself, be compassionate with yourself. Again, really start with yourself more. And also, very important, this will help in the overwhelm department. Be sure that you have a balance of the in breath and the out breath, because my tendency, especially as a former therapist, was to take in the suffering, but do these weak little out breaths and not think about that piece as strongly. And then we can get weighed down. It can be too much. So I highly recommend just keeping an eye out for that, to keep the balance between the in breath and the out breath, and having that experience be equally strong both directions. I think that'll help a lot with coming out of this feeling um, just glowing and positive yourself, because that is the end of the drama, right? It begins with the taking and the suffering and ends with the bringing of the happiness. Now, people can also go the other way with it, and they do little tiny breaths in and big breaths out, and just concentrating on the joy part. But that's not going to be the deep, full experience of compassion. So, again, in order to experience this as it's meant to be, you really need to keep a balance of a strength of in breath and out breath. So, just a word to the wise. Another question that people often have, not so much with the theme that we did in particular this time, it can sometimes happen with sickness. And of course, we might be doing Donglin for somebody who's sick. And people can sort of worry, well, am I taking in the sickness? And I would answer the question with a question, because I'm a Jewish therapist and that's what we do. I would say, if somebody has a broken arm and you do Donglin for the suffering of their broken arm, will your arm suddenly boop, break? No. So it's about the experience of suffering. That's what we're taking in and breathing out. It's not about the actual, broken arm, or, the divorce somebody's going through, or whatever the suffering is that is the theme. It's about taking in the suffering itself and replacing it with joy. So before anybody asks that, I'm just going to go ahead and answer it, because it's a very popular question, not with the theme we did this time, but it comes up with other themes. So I want to say again, this is applicable in life. yes, it's good to practice this on the cushion, just like you would do, exercises and weightlifting or whatever to strengthen your muscles. Um, my son is a big weightlifter. And when I came to visit him, I was going to be there a while. So I brought a very big suitcase. And I said, well, it's a good thing you did all that weightlifting because now you're going to carry my suitcase up the stairs. So there was a practical application. And he was like, no problem. And he just, took it with one hand and up he went up the stairs, no problem, because he'd done all this practice every day and he had strengthened himself for that. And so in everyday life, there's plenty of occasion for us to practice compassion. And I can speak from personal experience after having practiced this on the cushion a lot. I've been much more able to just out of habit and stronger capacity, been able to bring compassion in the moment. We can actually do Donglen quite often without anybody knowing because we're just breathing, which we do anyway. But also, even without doing official Donglen in the moment, in the course of the day, we can still practice compassion. And it's there for us much more strongly because we've been exercising the compassion muscles. So please look for places where you can apply it. They talk about aspirational bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. Bodhicitta just basically meaning the mind being awake to how we're all in this together. And compassion is very much a part of that. So we practice it and then we apply it. So you'll just naturally do that more and more as you practice it and gain that capacity and develop that habit. And there are so many places right now where we can apply that. I also think that as our worlds seem to be getting very small, as we're all sheltering in place, you notice that with this practice, we open the lens actually very wide. Also, when we're feeling pain ourselves, our lens gets particularly small. The example I love to give is if you stub your toe, all of a sudden your mental lens zeroes down to the size of your toe. It's exactly that size. And, but it's in those very moments when our mind wants to get very small. And then, of course, all that's filling our mind is the pain of the toe. That's exactly the moment to start with compassion for ourselves and then step it out, out, out until it's as vast as we did right at the end of the Donglen practice. So it's as vast as the whole world. So whatever pain we started with when we sat down is exactly the same size, but now our lens went from this size to as vast as the whole world, right? So what percentage of our experience now is that pain? That's different. That's what's different. And I urge you to enact compassion and find ways to help others as much as you can, because again, it expands your lens. I just find when I'm in pain, it's so much more rewarding even to find somebody else with a similar pain and how can I help them? Very often people who are victims of abuse, to move through from victimhood to survivorhood and feeling their own sense of worth in their lives, they often work with people who are going through a similar thing, and they find it so satisfying, particularly satisfying. Many people who have gone through addiction find it just so rewarding and satisfying to then be able to help somebody else who's going through wrestling with addiction. And so all of us are suffering from things right now. And if we can help each other through this, so much the better. So now I want to invite you, first of all, to join us next week, where I will teach a practice that dovetails really nicely with Donglin. It also will be really helpful in our examining what we want to do on the other side of this. I mentioned in the beginning of this talk today how we're going through this passage, all of us. So we're not going to be the same coming out of this that we were going into it, nor should we be. So what is our genuine path forward from here? That's something that we want to develop the capacity to see in ourselves. But when we're so full of distraction of the everyday, things we occupy our minds with, even while we're sheltering in place, it's very hard for us to sort of see to the bottom of the pond. The ripples have to calm down. The silt has to settle. Then we can see all the way to the bottom. Then we can see what we really want to do with our lives going forward. So that's some of what we're going to look at together. And this practice will help with that. It'll also help with those moments when we're just not knowing what to do next and worried about the future and so on. How can we just bring ourselves to the present again and again? So this practice helps with that too. So I know I'm giving it quite a high billing, but this has been a popular practice for 2.5 millennia for a reason, actually many reasons. So it'll seem very simple, just like this practice today was. But when we do it again and again, it can actually become quite profound and powerful. We can use it that way. And the intent with which we use these practices is key. So now let's just spend the last minute together doing a little bit more Donglin. So, and I just want to thank everybody again for all the beautiful messages I'm seeing. I'm going to sit and savor them after we end our call. And please send your questions and thoughts during the week so that we can hopefully, I can, aim what I say a little bit more to what people are feeling. All right, so please close your eyes. And once again, holding your small suffering self in your heart. If you can remember the suffering, breathe the last bit of it, every last drop, into your great compassionate heart. Those dense, heavy clouds. And on the exhale, aiming that vast joy that is a very quality of the vast ground of being, aiming it right into that suffering one so that it's 100% joy. You want that for this suffering one now and always. And another breath. And again, that suffering one is now smiling and glowing, full of joy. And we think of somebody who's dear to us. We don't want any suffering like this for them. And we want to take every bit of it away. And so we breathe for them. And just as strongly exhaling that joy for now and always, seeing it soak into them. Now imagine everyone on this call. We don't want any of our fellow participants to feel any bit of this suffering. And so we breathe for everybody on this call. Big inhalation And big exhalation, seeing everyone's faces change, feeling their minds change. One more breath. And then we breathe for everyone across this world, taking in their anxiety and overwhelm, that suffering that comes of it. It's coming in from all directions. And we exhale out in all directions. Complete, utter joy for now and always. And imagining the experience of each and all of them completely changing. Thank you all so much for coming. So good to be with you. Bye-bye.